Hello and welcome to the Wannabe Guru podcast. My name is Pierce and I am the Wannabe Guru. Thank you so much for being here and listening and being part of this experience. Let's see, today I wanted to start off by telling a short little funny story because some people have been asking, are you a wannabe guru or is your name the Wannabe Guru? And it's kind of both. So I'll kind of explain where this name originated and tell you that it's kind of like a play on words, but at the same time it's also for namesake. That's what I would like to be called in this podcast. And so to begin with, many years ago, and I think this was about 8 years or so ago, I was traveling with my girlfriend at the time, who is now my partner, Aya, and we've been together for approximately 17 years now. Oh my gosh. And so when we were first getting to know each other, and even I guess we had known each other for a while at that point, we were traveling in Nicaragua and she had gotten a job out there and I was basically just tagging along to enjoy the experience and surf and travel to a new location. And so when we first got there, the person in whom we were staying with, Aya and myself, had a little tiff. And we didn't flare up too much, but we got in like a little argument. And I think at some point I had walked out of where we were staying and I shut the door hard. And I guess that information or that perspective had been given to the owner. And they basically said, like, we don't want that type of energy, staying here. So at which point they told me that I specifically needed to leave. And so at that point, like Aya and I had discussed it and she had said that, well, it was directed towards me and she didn't necessarily need to leave, that I did. So I physically had to leave that premises and go find a place to stay, which sucked because I had never been there before. And then at which point I had to go find, like a hotel or a hostel or someplace to stay inexpensively, because obviously we were there on a budget and it was one of the few places in that location that seemed nice and safe and so on and so forth. So it was a pretty heavy blow that night. It was like really shocking for me to have to experience that, and then for her not to go with me. Because, as like a partnership, I thought it'd be both of us, taking the blow, but it was just me. So that night was pretty detrimental as far as like that evening, having to find a place. And then, so from there, I eventually found a place to stay and I went drinking that evening without my partner. And later on that evening, I found myself in a bar, and I was sitting down, and this older gentleman invited me over, and he was Australian, and we started chatting. But at the same time, like, I almost felt like he was lonely, but he didn't really want to talk. Almost like he just wanted to, like, vent and express himself, but just for someone to like be there to listen. And I guess I was that person. And so at some point, after listening to him for a while and having a couple of shots together, he asked me, like what I did. not necessarily for a living, but like who I was and what I was all about. And I told him, a couple of things, why I was there and who I was there with, and kind of what I wanted to do on my journey on this life path. And one of the things I was talking about was, at that time I had been, I had gone to school for child psychology and then kind of fell out of that. Excuse me. And then, became a hypnotherapist, went to HMI and became a hypnotherapist for a couple of years, and then kind of redirected myself to being a life coach. And so in all of that as well, one of the things I mentioned also was that I was like a Reiki master. So I had taken all my courses in India, and, I guess this particular gentleman had a perspective on like what that meant. And I'm pretty sure I was taking shots. I was like smoking a cigarette at the time, and he looks at me, and it was like I'll remember this for the rest of my life. But he just like looked at me with this like big grin, and he's like, "So you're a wannabe?" And I was like, okay. Like, I don't really know exactly what that means. And it was kind of like, like a little bit of a slap in the face, because I don't know what his intention was with saying that, but I felt like he was kind of like, saying like, oh, you're supposed to be this like, this guy striving towards like some level of purity, and here you are, drinking and taking shots with me, so like you're a wannabe, right? And so it kind of affected me in that moment. And over time, I didn't really think about it, but it kind of circled back around like many years later, and I realized, it was kind of a funny play on words. And in a lot of like dimensions, like I am a wannabe, like I'm a wannabe great teacher. I am a wannabe guru, and I'm also a wannabe like great father and husband and person. And so in a lot of different ways, what was something that, was used as a way of like, backhanding me, instead kind of turned to like a playful way of words, in which I've turned it around and I've brought it closer to like who I am in my heart chakra, to say like in a lot of different ways, like I am a wannabe, and I'm a wannabe guru. And so that's why I decided to name my podcast Wannabe Guru. So that's the story behind that, in case anybody was wondering. And so thank you to that gentleman out there, if you're listening to in any capacity. Definitely at that time, when people are trying to make those type of remarks or whatever, it can actually define you, depending on how you want to use that. And for anybody listening, when somebody says like something like that to you, and it does actually affect you in any degree, I think it's important to kind of look at that and see why it's affected you, to any degree. But I think at that point, it really went to my core and defined me, because obviously it swung all the way back around to who I am now, and using that terminology to define not necessarily myself, but a way in which I can use it for positivity, and that's where I am now. So in this podcast, a lot of this is unscripted. I don't like to define myself by taking recognition of either questions or topics ahead of time. I like to keep things fresh, and sometimes I've learned that some of the best answers that come about are from a level of like intuition. And though I see the necessity of maybe reviewing some things that I've said, and going back and even changing maybe some of the remarks that I'll make, because I am always learning and growing, and you'll see throughout this podcast and time that there will be things that obviously I will learn and go back and make changes on. But for right now, I felt like it was necessary that you get to see me for who I am and all my positivity and even flaws, in answering these questions from you, the viewers. And I like to keep it kind of sacred, a sacred space, knowing that whatever is asked, I'm not naming names, dates, simply just taking questions that I feel are something of value. So that being said, you can always send me a question at wannabegurupodcast@gmail.com, and I'll take your questions, and maybe one of these days I'll be answering it on this podcast. So today I have a couple of questions, and I'll start with the first one. And I just looked at this literally like 5 minutes ago. So the first question that I have is, how do you forgive someone that has hurt you? Ooh, it's a really good question, because I've had a lot of people that have hurt me in my life, and I'm still learning what it means to completely forgive somebody, especially when that hurt goes deep to your core, and you have to once again analyze what it is of why it's actually affecting you that greatly. Because I think that hurting is also something that you have to define for yourself, in the sense that when you absolutely love yourself and are able to acquire that level of understanding for who you are and your capabilities, you start to realize that there's not a lot of people out there that can really hurt you. So for me, over time, I've realized that the people that can really affect me and hurt me are people that are close to you. So I think that hurt is a part of like the developmental process of the eternal state, so that you can see how it hurts you and why, because you really have to take a look at that, because sometimes a lot of that hurt just derives from ego, and it's not really hurt. It's just like, someone's able to prick a part of yourself that you feel, is important, and like, what is really that, right? So I think a lot of forgiveness comes from, the depth of what love really means for yourself and to others. So when I am hurt, I see that, when I hurt somebody else, do I really mean it? Like a lot of times when I'm out in the world and I say something maybe what somebody else considers negative, is there an intention of hurt behind it? Is my intention to physically or mentally hurt somebody? And a lot of times that's usually not the case. Like I always tend to find that a lot of people think that someone may be trying to hurt them, but in all reality, that's not what a lot of people are out there to do. They're just there to give their perspective on things and what they've learned, and some of those things obviously aren't right, because they're trying to convey them to the world, and or you're caught up in that energy, and if it doesn't align with who you are, you consider that hurt. So sometimes when I sit back and take recognition of why it is that I was actually hurt, was more so my ego getting involved in the fact that there was a perspective that I wasn't aligned with, and therefore it was hurting that part of myself which wasn't source. So I feel like, when you boil a lot of this stuff down, it's very surface level and it's not like really going to your core. And or when there are some things that are, very to your core and people are, maybe trying to intentionally hurt you, I feel like true forgiveness comes from like understanding. And that understanding is that, people have been taught and come from, parents and or a society that has not given them and fed them what they've needed to have that level of love within themselves so that they can understand what that means and how that defines them and then give that to others. So typically, just from like a little kid and, what I tell my daughter and, sometimes she'll say, Dad, someone said this to me and it hurt my feelings. A lot of times I feel it's like the exact same thing with adults. They're being taught and or we've been taught things that, weren't the best, and therefore we expelled them to the world, and the feedback on that has just been not the most positive thing. So I think there has to be a lot of understanding in the fact that, people say and do things that aren't necessarily who they are to their core, but have just been taught and have been fed so much incorrect information that that's typically what happens when somebody does that. It's not always their intention, but it's just the information that they've been given. So I hope that answers part of that. But it seems like the other questions kind of coincide with that one. And the next one is, what is true forgiveness to you? True forgiveness. So I feel like I'm able to forgive completely. And I think that true forgiveness is kind of giving that energy to God, if you will, taking that hurt and blame and on yourself and or other people and just giving that energy to God. Because if you know that it's not right for you and you know that it's not necessary to dwell on those types of thoughts and experiences, then that's the only direction that it needs to go. You could only circle around something so many times and try and define it until it just doesn't become good for you. At which point I give it to God, because I know that that's the only place that it can go, other than, spinning in my head somewhere in the back of my unconscious, locked away, if you will. And that forgiveness is like a release. And sometimes people have to understand that with the physical body, it's a little bit different, because a lot of times with trauma, your body can hold on to different emotions. We redirect and we store different emotions in our body. A lot of that is what I truly believe to be psychosomatic, and I think that's where a lot of ailments come from, is the fact that you'll experience trauma, and though you are able to forgive that to a certain degree, your body also, just like scar tissue, you have to rework that scar tissue so that you're able to process it and heal those nerve endings or whatever it is that you stored, and also release that. Do I think that's also part of the psychological letting go of that process? Yes, absolutely. That's necessary. But in part of that forgiveness, you have to completely let it go out of your body as well. So it's a physical, mental, spiritual connection in which that you have to go through so that you're able to truly forgive that which you are embodying into your experience. And that comes from you figuring out what it is that works best for you, so that you can find that modality to allow that release from that, and to each their own. I've found mine, and we can talk about that at a later date, but it's definitely necessary that each person defines what that is for them, so that they can figure out the true forgiveness. Next question. Okay. What are your thoughts on past, present, and future coexisting? Okay. Past, present, and future coexisting. Well, I have another story about that we can dive into another time, with different beings kind of showing me, extraterrestrial beings showing me what that means. But I kind of defined what that was, way before that experience. Past, present, and future. So, since I was really young, I would define moments in my life that were very important, and I would tell my future self to connect to that energy in the timeline of which I exist in this body, so that I could reconnect to those special moments. I hope that made sense. Because I also feel like those little moments where you're able to connect on that stream of information, whether it be past, present, or future, I think all interconnects, because I feel like when you're able to really meditate and go to a deeper level and heal those traumas within yourself, I also feel that in a way you can heal that inner child and those past experiences that you had, so that you can rewire yourself in the now and become a different person. I believe that it's not just a physiological thing. You can, literally change your genetics and manifest a new you in getting that deep within yourself to be able to do that. So that, I guess that's more of the past. As far as the present, of course, the present is now. What is the present? It's any given moment. But I also feel it's like a stream of information, all interconnected. And I don't think it's necessarily moving forward or backwards. I feel it's kind of like a fiber optic cable, with a stream of information that is both going forward and back at the same time. And I think that's kind of what time is, in a way. It's linear. There's not any necessary direction in which it's moving. It just is there and is in movement, but I wouldn't necessarily say it's a forward or backwards direction. It's just a stream of information, just like a string connected to any given point and vibrating, that string, and saying that, that it's either moving forward or backwards. I feel like it's just vibrating, and therefore is interconnected. Next question. Well, this is kind of like a two-part question, I guess. Do you think the future can change the past? Okay, so perfect. Yes, I do think the future can change the past. And so I think in these bodies, or at least now in the evolution of the human spirit, where most people are, they can't necessarily see that. But I think there are some, and I think quite a few people out there that are able to recognize that it can change the past. I think that in all the different decisions that we make, we create different timelines of also who we are. And so in all that interconnectedness, I truly feel that, we also change everything around us. I feel like, there's so many interconnections for the thoughts and spiritual energy that we put out into the world. And I think that those strings of vibration stretch throughout the entire universe and resonate throughout everything. And I think that's why it's so important to have those positive, loving thoughts towards all things and people, because I think in a way that it all is alive on a certain resonant level, and that when we put ourselves out there and are able to generate that level of passion and love, that it vibrates throughout the universe. And I think that one day when we evolve to this state more so, we'll be able to recognize that throughout the entire planet and define it, through science as well. Sometimes the way in which I try to explain that to people is that, birds have a migratory path that they take. Excuse me. Man, this soda water. And we always just thought like, oh, these animals just magically traveled these different channels and we don't know why. And it's just because they've done it, so many different times throughout their genetics, they just know where to go. But, as science dives further into the understanding of which and why these migratory paths of all these different types of animals are there, like we get to see that they have basically like magnets within their beaks, and they're actually more interconnected with these different pathways than we even understand. And I have a feeling, it goes much deeper than that too. I truly believe that though they might not see it, their inner eye is able to connect to those wavelengths or those pathways to see exactly where they're supposed to go. And these different channels that vibrate out to all different parts of the world that we are just limited to see with these eyes. It's only when we open our third eye that we're able to see these different pathways and channels and portals that connect to all different places in the universe. But I truly believe that all these strings of vibration connect so far out there. And in a way, I think that to me is a level in which I understand my spirituality, because I feel like it's all interconnected, and the love that we give for not only ourselves but to other people, they feel that. So it's important to show love and to tell you, the viewers, that I love you, and I recognize the importance of what that means for myself, to give myself love, and even those out there that might be listening, because I feel like you're connected to that vibration, whether you may know it or not. I feel it. I feel it in my bones. I see it. I've seen it many different times through meditation or taking psychedelics, seeing those different channels or pathways and realizing that they stretch out so far out there. And that's why, like, though we find ourselves so insignificant, sometimes we don't understand the depth of our importance and our thoughts, because they reach so far out and they're affecting other civilizations and other living things, and even more so the unique bubble around us. And I feel like even with science, that bubble grows all the time, because they said like, oh, like we generate this amount of field and it's like 5 feet, and then it became 10 feet, and now it's like 20 feet, and then we're affecting our neighbors, and in all reality, like I realized that, that internal, that the smaller circumference of that particular bubble with that type of energy field that can be electromagnetic and that they can, read, I feel stretches out extremely far. and all the people around us, not only within our neighbors, but our society. And I can feel it. I mean, I can sit at home and meditate, and I can feel the fear and the unknowingness of people around me, even within my neighborhood. And I recognize that that generated field between my neighbors and myself is important, that we're all thinking positive, and that though we may not know it, as a planet, we're feeling all those different things and all those different thoughts that are coming to you of like fear and frustration and unknowingness. You have to take recognition of whether or not they're even your thoughts or they're even your vibration. Because sometimes I'll sit back and I'll be like, oh my God, was I just thinking that? Like, how much of that was actually me? You know, and when I try and define that, man, sometimes I realize that a large majority of where that was even coming from was not even myself. You know, it was like the state of fear mongering that's just happening with so many different people right now, and it's driven home through so much social media and all different sites and people that are trying to profit off of fear. And I truly believe that the more we radiate love and understanding and know that even in the worst scenario possible, which may be death to a lot of people, is actually one of the most blessed things that could ever happen to you. And I think when we start recognizing that and start understanding that if that's the worst thing that could happen, and that is actually the most amazing thing that could happen, then in all reality, we're generating not fear, but just a knowingness and acceptance of what will come, but trying to live in the now and generating that positivity and love in any given moment will change everything around us, and we'll grow as a civilization and as a species that much faster because we're capable of resonating that frequency and all of us vibing off of it and changing. And ultimately that's what I want for myself and my community and my world as human beings, and also all the things around me, because I feel like everything's alive. I don't feel, there's much of a difference between me and this table, really, except for the fact that it's just vibrating on a different frequency than I am. And to say that it's not alive doesn't give it justice for it being in my existence. There's just different levels of existence and being alive. And I feel like that's why, when you walk into a home and it feels weird, or you sit on a couch or a table and you're like, ooh, where has this thing been? We're vibing off that energy because we've given that thing energy, and I think it's important to recognize that, because we're generating energy into everything and vice versa. So we need to take awareness of that and know that when we're thinking those negative thoughts, that's going into our home, that's going into our kids and the people we love around us. So we need to understand that, take recognition of it, ask for forgiveness, and try not to dwell on it too long, and then give that same energy back to God, because that frequency and that energy is then converted right back into love, and that's where it goes. We define that energy so much for what we make of it rather than what it is. And I think when we do that, we don't give justice to the fact that it's just energy. And until we place our words and manifest our own definition of what that is, we start to change and manipulate something that was already pure. And that purity can also be given right back by that expression of love, and giving it back and changing it so that hopefully it goes out into the universe and goes into love of something else. And I think that's what we need to do more. Figuring out what that is for each person, I think, is unique, because we are all unique and we need to find out what works for us best. That's my experience, and I'm hoping that I was able to define that for you and express it the best way that I can. And thank you so much for listening. I love you all, and until next time.